Alright, let's go. The Thing is a science fiction horror film released in 1982 and was directed by John Carpenter. While originally flopping in critical and general reception, as well as doing pretty not great in the box office, but is now recognized as one of the most acclaimed horror movies of the genre's existence, much of it for the film's iconic use of doubling, or mimicking specifically. In the world of doppelgangers and double films, The Thing, then, is a very unique case. The setup of the film is quite simple. A US military research base in Antarctica discovered through a mysterious stray dog the ruins of a nearby Norwegian base that was attacked by an unknown entity. This unknown entity ends up being the dog, or rather its replication of the dog, or the monster known as The Thing. The Thing possesses a uniquely deadly ability on top of its extraterrestrial combat efforts, mainly shown through the elaborate body horror to eliminate life. The ability to perfectly replicate any living entity to an uncanny resemblance, embodying no fixed appearance in its existence, thus creating one of the most powerful tools of deception, acting as a catalyst to incite its chaos. Indeed, there are elements of classical uses of doubling and anxieties created with that, especially around Freud's idea of the uncanny. The uncanny explores anxieties and disturbance through familiarity, the idea of the frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar. For example, Blair, the group's biologist, goes into a complete frenzy when discovering the deadly abilities of the Thing, forcing the group to put him in quarantine outside the camp until further notice. Later, when MacReady checks on him, his personality becomes much calmer, and he professes how much better he's feeling. MacReady reads this suspiciously, sensing uneasiness in his suddenly normal behavior compared to his earlier frenzy, echoing his fear in the familiar. In typical doppelganger fiction, uncanniness is explored through the perspectives of people interacting with their identical doppelganger, and usually the conflict between the two. Paul Coates cites that the existence of identical doppelgangers serves for the purpose of the pathological attempt to replace the image of the other with that of the self, essentially inciting harm for the goal of replacement. Indeed, The Thing does exactly this, constantly replacing and mimicking the members of the research base throughout the film. However, very few more of Coach's points actually apply in The Thing, since the film removes the interactions and conflicts between identical doppelgangers, instead narrowing its focus on the process of becoming and transforming entirely. The monster bears no fixed appearance or identity, presenting itself as, Eduardo Oyarzun puts it, a body without organs, a Deleuzian concept which presents the body not as a fixed identity, but as a fluid entity free from ideological constraints. The nature of the monster as well as the setup of the film naturally create underlying anxieties amongst the group as well as the viewer. The astonishingly elaborate and vivid body horror created by the monster is nothing short of a visual spectacle, and is often brought up in discussions through its sheer grotesqueness and gut-wrenching design. However, I will argue, as other authors have too, that there is a much more poignant use of horror and anxiety created through the mere awareness and knowledge of the monster's existence. Similarly, while The Thing is the main antagonist of the film, it is not the sole perpetrator in the destruction of the group. Oyarzun claims that much of the destruction of the group comes through the inherent anxieties of losing subjective recognition. Because of the uncanny resemblance of the monster in mimicking human life, no one, including the viewer, can discern who is and isn't the monster. The concept of trust is completely discarded amongst the group, replaced by complete paranoia and skepticism that will ultimately lead to chaos. And chaos does it ever lead to. In one of the iconic scenes, after the death of Norris, MacReady takes control of the group to suss out who is the monster amongst them, forcing the members of the group to be restrained. Before this, however, Clark, who the film subtly hints at being the monster by this point, attempts to lunge himself at MacReady when he is caught off guard, but is killed himself in the process. This echoes the desire to destroy any force that threatens fixed subjective identity, given the clear tension and lack of trust amongst the members of the group. Clark's death is revisited later, and given much more depth when it is discovered that the remaining group that he was never the monster up until his death, and that he lashed out at MacReady over his own suspicions of MacReady being the monster. In this instance, we see the damaging effects of not the monster itself, but more the idea of the monster, fueled by its ability to perfectly replicate anyone. The scene exposes the daunting reality of the situation. It has become borderline impossible to trust any identity beyond oneself, and that one subjective identity is under immense threat. It is the collective anxiety of the monster along with the monster itself that are the frontrunners of the destruction of the group. Emma Cost suggests there is a very strong relationship between the two, and that the functions of the monster suggest allegories for manifestations of anxieties. The transformation scenes encompassing body horror, as I mentioned earlier, are astonishingly grotesque, and do serve a noticeable role in their goals. Like anxiety, the monster hides in plain sight through mimicking, ready to infiltrate and transform its respective hosts. While the previously mentioned dog thing goes through its first transformation in front of everyone, the members of the research group are completely stunned, panicked and fueled by anxiety. Koss argues that the vivid transformations serve as a method of emotional infiltration. The dog thing transforms the idea of the monster into a threat that expands beyond a person's external world and shifts the focus into the internal world. Rather than the monster just being something to look at, it can now be felt and experienced. While this method of emotional infiltration isn't as obvious and clear-cut as a monster's literal function of infiltration, it still plays a pivotal role in harming the group, given Clark's death much later. While this psychoanalytical reading with anxiety in relation to the monster's methods of infiltration, as well as knowledge of his existence, is certainly true to some merit, I will argue that it isn't always consistently true. In the final scene, the monster is viewed by the remaining MacReady and Childs through mainly acceptance over anxiety. The film remains ambiguous by the end of the film whether Childs is the thing or not, or even if MacReady is the thing. By this point, the two characters have had enough time to realize that it has become pointless to worry about each other's identities, and have accepted their fates in this doomed environment. Trying to figure out who is and isn't the thing would have likely accelerated their deaths even further. Anxiety doesn't exactly merit this kind of acceptance. However, eliciting anxiety is still a very powerful emotional tool for the monster on initial discoverance. Before wrapping up, I think it's worth mentioning the role of the film in its time period and how it came to be. The Thing is actually a loose adaptation of the 1951 film The Thing from Another World. While both films depict invading alien forces, the 1951 version actually gives the monster a clear identity, possessing a recognizable face. The film falls under the large catalog of poorly thought of 1950s communist hysteria films revolving around the foreign anxieties of communism and the USSR, focusing its anxieties on the mere otherness of the monster compared to the rest of the cast. In the over 30-year gap between the films, the attitude surrounding the Cold War in America greatly changed. Events like Watergate and the Vietnam War exposed the false idealization of America, with damage to America coming through within the country and through its direct actions. To make another allegory, I argue that the monster in the latter version echoes the internal damage America caused to itself during this period. As like the members of the group were in the first transformation scene, Americans were stunned and disillusioned in their normalcy when these major political events broke out, and that eternal threats would cause noticeable harm for both scenarios. Indeed, this was fueled by the masquerade of the system, much like the consistent masquerading of the monster in doubling the members of the group.